Recording. Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to my Build an API workshop today. So we're Mac. And before we start today's event, I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today. My name is Sai. I'm the current events director at Monash Associate Coding. And thank you for coming today. So we're a tech club that imparts valuable technical skills and industry relevant experience for students. Our goal is to foster the tech culture at Monash and provide a collaborative setting for students to learn from one another. And they do this by building up skills for a career in tech while making friends along the way. So don't forget to check us out on social media and let's get started. So this is a 2-hour event, which is pretty long, I say. There's quite a bit of stuff, but I guarantee you everything is worth whatever we're going to be covering. So it's 2 hours, but you'll learn a lot. So APIs, what are they? Like, where does this fall into like programming really? Yeah. There's also Mongodb Neuron, but they don't have any reps yet. I'm just going to quickly mention them. They are sponsored for this event. There are 2 primary divisions: high performance computing and AI. They do research projects and the like. And currently they had a recruiting session, so they're already closed off, but they usually open mid-year again. So watch out for that. All their links and stuff are available here. So if you're interested in that, scan the QR code. The Canva link will be made available after the session is finished. So, okay, let's go over whatever we're going to be covering today. First off, what is backend development? Because that is effectively telling us what an API is. Then we're going to be going over what we're building today, the REST architecture, Mongodb, which is our database of choice, Fast API, and finally our deployment. So we're going to be putting this on the internet that anyone can use it. So once again, I highly suggest going to the Notion doc and looking at the setup section. So up here, please set up these things. So I'd say at least a MongoDB and GitHub account. These 2 things you'll probably be using throughout the course of uni anyway. So it's a really good idea to get them set up now. So with that in mind, I'll be showing you how to set up the Python prerequisites. So all of them will be covered by me because we're going to be using something called a virtual environment. But for now, system design. So under every big tech application, Facebook, Instagram, all the stuff like that, they have massive backend systems that govern them. So when you design a large system, you're going to have, okay, well, first off, you're going to have a place to store your data. That's called a database. Then you're going to have a place that executes stuff. So this could be considered a web service. You may have heard of AWS and their range of web services. They run things for you. So you could have, say, something that listens to the front end, which could be your application. Say a user wants to find or search for something, or they want to buy something. It sends it to the server and that computes it for you. Now, you can modularize this even further by talking about what does what. So who is in charge of what bit? Say this person could be in charge of all the stuff related to users. And this section here could be related to products. So for eBay, you'd be looking at a whole section dedicated towards a product and all its categories, all its properties. So system design really talks about what we're building together. And backend specifically talks about what's going on internally. The front end is what's shown to the user, whereas the backend is what controls and puts everything together. So there's a good video on this by Prasam, microservices. It's not really a serious video, but it's good enough to give you an idea of what backend development is like. Now, so as for the link, I'll just put it again. Here you go. Yeah. Okay. So what are we going to be building today? First off, we're going to be just reviewing what our system today is going to look like. First off, our stack, what people commonly refer to as a tech stack, is the set of technologies we build our stuff on. We're going to be using Mongodb as our database and Fast API, which is a Python library for creating APIs. Still haven't explained what it is. And we're going to be deploying this to Heroku. So let's look at how this system works together. So this is the type of diagram you may see in a system design interview. So this sort of stuff is also practical to coding interviews where you may be asked to design a system from scratch. So a user asks for a connection. They're across the internet, and Heroku is going to be supplying our API. So it's going to be hosting our API. And this API is a bit of code that's running, and it'll be interacting with our MongoDB. So it'll get data from our server, and this will all be deployed from GitHub. A deployment is effectively saying, okay, let's get our code, bundle it up, and put it onto the web as if it's ready. And the user, or the programmer in this case, will be pushing their code to GitHub. So what is an API? Now, APIs are application programmable interfaces. This is kind of meaningless when you say it like that. And it gets even more meaningless when you talk about the architectures and stuff. So in simple words, an API is something you can request. You can hit it, and it will give you data back. Or perhaps you can send it data, and it will register it. So the API we'll be using, well, the architecture we'll be using today is REST. This is called representational state transfer. And if you were to search it online, there's a lot of weird stuff that appears. And it's not really relevant to REST, implementing REST, because there's just a lot of technical rules. But really the important stuff, what's going on, are its functions. You can get, post, and delete stuff. So to get something is to retrieve a resource. You can get data from the server, say lifetime data of some resource that's being used. You can post data. That means you create new data. So if you were to create a new user, you would be posting it to the server, as you can see in this diagram here. And that gets sent to this other server here. That could be a database or something else. There's also putting, which is the act of updating stuff, and deletion, which deletes stuff from your database. Now, the method of communication or whatever's sent between those packages could vary. It could be JSON. So JSON is what people are most familiar with. In Python, the things that look like JSON are dictionaries. So we'll be using them commonly. There's XML and HTML. Don't need to worry too much about those ones. But for the most part, that's what an API is. You can send stuff to it. You can retrieve stuff from it. It is the way in which application works. The back end communicates with the front end. Say the front end needs some data. It asks the back end and returns it back. So that's how these two things connect to each other, is that the front end will keep on communicating with the back end. As an alternative, just to put it out there, there is something called GraphQL. Now, GraphQL is another API type. And instead of asking for all the resources you have for one particular area, we can say, okay, I want you to give me this data precisely. And as a result, GraphQL, which was developed at Facebook, is a way of querying a whole database, or could be anything. It doesn't have to be a database, but basically sending specific queries on what sort of information you want. So as I've shown here, you can ask for a specific query, user names, post, and title, and it'll return exactly that. So that was a quick introduction. There is some more stuff on the Notion document. So there's some stuff here for demonstrating it's a good idea to look over it in your own time. I've covered the vast majority of it, but let's get to coding now. Okay, so it does say before that you should have a MongoDB account set up. So assuming you've got your account set up, we'll not be touching that for now. Let's open up our folder and go wherever you have space. So create a new folder, name it whatever you want, and I'll be opening my Visual Studio Code here. And that'll come here. Okay, let's open it up. First thing we're going to be doing is, instead of just installing our dependencies, because we have a few packages here, so just to show you, there are these 5 or 6 different libraries that we'll be using. We're not going to be installing it to our main Python installation. This is because there are issues that will arise. I'll briefly mention them, but I'll copy this for now. So copy this from your requirements.txt and put it into here. We're going to call this requirements.txt, right? So these will be our Python dependencies. Then you're going to want to open up your terminal. So there are equivalent options for if you're using PyCharm or some other text editor. You can use the Windows terminal instead. You have to navigate to the file, however. So depending on what you want to use, it's not really an issue. But for now, let's get back to using our VS Code terminal. And what we're going to do is create a Python virtual environment. So this is going to be a bit of a hassle if it's going to be too small. I think that's fine. So depending on your Python interpreter, so some people have Py, that works. Some people have Python, that also works. You just have to figure out which one yours is using. And depending on that, you just write Python m venv, venv, and that is virtual environment. Then you do env. I think, let's see, let's do that. That will create an environment. So a virtual environment is like this containerized version of Python. So it's finished right now. And in Mac/Linux, the instructions may be slightly different. So you see here, there's this activation file. If I was to go to it, so if I was to write n, which is the name of the folder here that contains our little version of Python, and I was to do scripts, because that's this file folder here, and then I was to do activate, it will go into our virtual Python environment. Now we're going to install our Python dependencies. So we're going to do pym. Now, when you write pym in this environment, so you can see there's this env green bit here. It's actually going to install it to our local, this small virtual Python environment, not our global one. And I'm going to do pym pip install r requirements.txt. So this will read it from the file. And it will install our dependencies. So you guys should also be doing this. I don't think there should be any issues while it's installing. So if there are, put it in the chat. Okay, so ignore the error. That's just a pip install error, warning related thing. So our dependencies are installed, but we don't really have a project yet. Okay. Now we're going to go into MongoDB. So I'm going to assume you have MongoDB set up. And it's going to look like this. So this is what mine look like when I set it up. I will just delete this for now. So I'm going to delete this cluster. And I'm going to assume that you haven't set yours up fully. So here we go. Just going to delete it. This may take a while. Oh no. I don't know why there's 3 servers, but okay. Yeah. That takes too long. I will probably. Oh no. Okay. It's going to shut down. That's okay. Let's let that do whatever it needs to. We don't need to interact with MongoDB for now. We'll just ensure that it's ready to go for whenever we set it up. So for now, I'm going to have the entry point file. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this main.py. Okay, so I'm going to just go over each of the libraries here. So it's pretty important that you understand what they're doing. Fast API is our API building library of choice. So it will provide us with the methods for getting, setting, deleting, updating our resources. Moda is this MongoDB library that will interact with our database for us. Pydantic comes with Fast API, so it verifies your types. Uvicorn is this web server library, so it runs and creates web server applications, of which Fast API is one. There's also decouple, which is for something called environment variables, which I'll talk about in a bit. Okay, this is finished. So let's get back to our database. If you've created a new database, you click here, you click on the free tier, all these default options should be fine. And then you go to create cluster. And now we have this stuff here. So we have authentication. You should create a username and password that you will be using to log into your database. So here I've already got one set up by username and it has a password, but you should enter your own in and save that somewhere. As for the environment, where would you like to connect from? I'm going to do cloud environment. So I have 000 set up. This means anyone can access it. For the time being, this is a bad security practice. You should be doing this. I'm going to just remove it, but you can just enter it like this, 0.0.0/0. And I'm just call it all because everyone can access it. If you don't feel particularly safe about it, you can also add your particular IP in. Not that it's too important right now. And you'll finish up and close. We can go to our database now. And give it a bit of time to clean up. There we go. We can now connect to it. If we choose click connect to our application, you can choose Python, not that it's going to make a difference. And I'm going to copy this. So this is our URL to access our database. So I'm going to save this in a file called .env. So I'm going to call this .env. Is that too small, by the way? I think it should be fine. It shouldn't be .env.text. That should be just .env. And I will call this Mongo. So this will be Mongo equals to our username password thing. You have to substitute your username in, by the way. So it says user1, which it substituted that in for me, but it also has to substitute in your password. So I'm going to just retrieve it from here. MongoDB. Here. I've already got it set up, and I'll put that in. And it should look like this after you're done. We'll be using this file to access our database in a bit. So we can then browse our collections. And these are our collections of databases. So each database has a set of collections. First off, we're going to add our own data, first off. And I'm going to call the database notes. Then I'm going to call the collection name users. And I'm going to create it. Okay. This will retrieve the database and it will create an empty database for us. So you can insert documents as you want here, but we'll be using Fast API to do it. And so forth, so on. Okay. So let's go back to Python and we're going to set up our code. Okay, there's nothing in our main file, but typically how you do it is you'd have this app is equal to fast API instance like that. But the way I'm going to structure it is I'm going to have a folder called server, and that's going to contain all my information about my app. This will be just running everything that's inside here. So I'm going to have one called app. So that should be a file. So I'm going to create a new one called app.py. And here, I will do import UVcorn. So this is our web library. I'm going to do if name is equal to main. So this is the standard Python main loop thing. Then I'm going to do a uvicorn.run. And the first thing I specify is a route to my app. I haven't defined the app yet. It's in this folder here. So it's really accessed as server.app because it's in the folder server. And then you look at the app. But we don't have a thing called app yet. So we don't have an app variable. So I'm just going to say app for now. We're going to have to start that up ourselves. And then I'm going to say the host is 0.0.00. That's our local host. Then we're going to host it on the port 8080. This is basically saying, okay, we're going to have it hosted on our local instance, our local computer that is, and it's going to be particularly on this port because there are other ports that are using various activities. It's like a port in real life. They may be occupied and you can't use them. And I'm going to specify reload is true. This means whenever I edit any of the files, it will reload the API as opposed to you shutting it off and restarting it. It's very useful for debugging. Okay, then when I go to my app file, I'm going to have to import fast API. This is going to be spawning our fast API app. Import fast API. Then we're going to do a from server.endpoints. Okay, so what's going on here is you can separate API routes. Say you're doing something related to user data, you'd separate that into the user routes. If you were to separate it into product routes, you'd have a router called product. So I'm going to import. Actually, let's hold up importing this for now because I haven't defined my server endpoint yet. And we're going to have an app called Fast API. And that's all it's doing. So let's try running this thing. We're going to run py main.py. So we're going to be running this folder here. Yeah, it's currently recorded. Yeah. Okay, so this should run stuff like this, and it'll give you info about the application. And if it says application startup complete, we can go to our web browser. And when we type in 127.0.0.1, and I ask for the port 8080, it's going to say not found. But it's showing us this weird web page. If I write in /docs, it's showing us the fast API app. This is effectively an API that does nothing, but it's an API nonetheless. So it tells us no operations are defined, haven't defined anything. That's the primary goal of today. Okay, so assuming that, let's get into the primary stuff here. So we've gone through all of this stuff and we've created a Mongodb database. Let's highlight what we have to do today. First off, create a fast API application, which we've done. We haven't linked our database yet. We haven't linked our cluster, that is. We have to update the cluster from the API. So we have to send data towards it. And finally, we have to create some endpoints for our API. So we can say, okay, I want to add a new user. Finally, we're going to deploy the app on Heroku, which is going to make our app available to the internet. Now, just to give you a demonstration of what a completed API will look like. So if I was to come to my own stuff here. So I've got a completed API for a project I did a while back. I'll open this up. If I start this, and if I run this, that should create a new API again. If I go to the same link as before, 127.0.0.0, and at the port 8080, it's going to say not found, but you have to do /docs. And this is a completed API that I've worked on. It serves real-time train data. So an example of this is if I was to run this, this gives you all the train data. So I'm forwarding this data from some source, and it's giving us all the train data in Melbourne, which is something I've just done on the side. We're going to have a method that looks something like this, but there's going to be a bit more variety of these colors. So that's our completed API. Let's shut that down. And okay, so where to from here? Because we've got our app working, but how do we add new things to it? First off, we're going to have to be interacting with our database. So I'm going to create a new folder, a file, sorry, and I'm going to call it db.py, which is database.py. Now, we're going to be using Moda, which is our thing that interacts with MongoDB. So we're going to do import moda async.io, and that's going to be the thing controller that interacts with our database. And we're going to do from bson.objectID, import object ID. The reason we'll be doing this is because MongoDB objects, if I was to create one, each of them have a distinct ID. And I'll call that object ID. Then, oh, someone's here with them. Yep. Then we're going to create a client. We're going to call it MongoDB. Sorry, it's Moda. Moda async.io, like that. And we'll call async.io. Okay, this is going to be a mouthful to type in. Async.io motor clients MongoDB. Now, MongoDB here is our environment thing. So it's this URL here. How do we use this file here? This is what decouple is for. So we can import. So we're going to import. So from decouple, import config, and that's going to load in this thing called an environment variable. If I haven't mentioned this before, an environment variable is this specific setup variable, and it varies from PC to PC. Well, in the case that you set it up. Now, this is there because you may be leaking sensitive information like your password or your username, stuff like that you don't want on the internet. So we're going to be using this environment variable for our URL. And the way you import this is you say MongoDB, which is the name of our variable, is config of MongoDB, Mongo. So I call this variable here Mongo. You should be consistent in naming your thing. And that will create a client instance. So it will be this interaction between the database that's been established. From here, if you want to access the database, you say database is equal to the client. And I called my database notes. So if you notice here, it's called notes. You can do .notes like that, and it will hold on to the database. It'll be communicating to the database that way. From here, you could say user collection is equal to database dot. We're going to get the collection by the name users, which is what I defined before. So this is called users here. And then we're going to be interacting with the database. So the ways you do this are varied to begin with. So let's just check if it works. So let's run this thing. So I'm going to do py.db.py. Okay, so cannot import name config from decouple. What's going on here? Okay, so there's a bit of an issue here. This should actually be Python decouple, not decouple. So I'm going to do a py pip uninstall decouple. So this is a weird issue in which it confuses the decouple package. So I'm going to have to uninstall this. And I'm going to have to replace this with Python decouple. So pip install Python decouple. Okay, now let's give this a second try. Whoops, that shouldn't be doing that one. Sorry. I accidentally fell out of my environment. So I'm going to have to go back into my environment. So scripts, and then do activate again. And we're going to do py.db.py. Okay, so motor.async IO, tool, motor async IO. Now this is awfully specific with its name, so get it right. What motor.async IO. That should be fine. Yep. Motor.async IO clients. But check this. Client is, oh, okay. I forgot to add the motor.async IO. So this imports the method, not the method, the library, but you have to specify motor.async IO. So let's try that again. And it runs without no issues. So that's pretty good. But we're not doing anything with our database here. So if I come down quite a bit in the tutorial, there are a few ways to interact with our database. Now, ignore all this stuff, but you can insert data here, collection.insert, delete, update, and find data. So I'm going to just try inserting data now. So we're going to say user collection dot insert one, and we're going to say insert one, and we're going to try just giving it a Python dictionary. So this is going to cause some issues if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to do a test mistake. Okay, let's try running this now. py.db.py. There's no issues here. If I refresh this, it will show me a new object. So we've inserted this new thing into here. And notice that it has ID associated with it, and it's called an object ID. So this is the point of this BSON object ID thing, is so that we can turn this back into its unique ID. Each person will have their identifier so that we can re-access them in the database whenever we need to modify their data again. So what to do from here? Okay. We're going to have to import a few other things as well. But first off, we're going to have to, first off, add a new file and call it models.py. And I'm going to move this into the server. And what we're doing here is we're going to make clear what we're trying to do. What our database is going to look like, that is. And so just to recap, we're going to be creating a database that contains users and their notes. Now, the note bit is a bit to be determined if we have time, but each user will have three things. It'll have their username, their email, and their password. And so in Fast API, you can declare their model that it'll be sending to the server and receiving from the server. So we're going to import from Pydantic, which is our verification library. We're going to import base model and field. Field may not be required, but actually, you don't need field at this time. And from typing, so when we type something in Python, it's to say explicitly, this has the integer type, or this is a list of strings. So we're going to do from typing import optional. And then we're going to say class. We're going to declare what you call a model for a user. Okay, so this is going to be user, and it's going to be a base model type. So when I write this bracket in here, it's to say it's going to be of the type base model. It inherits base model. This is object-oriented stuff, but you don't need to be too concerned about it. And it's going to have the properties of the username, which is a string type, their email, which is also string, perhaps their age, which is an integer. Now, there are ways of forcing it to be a specific age. So I'll actually import field. So import field as well. Let's put that back in. And we're going to show off what you can do with this verification library. We're going to say field, and we're going to do ... You can see it has all these options here, but we're going to be focused on it being greater than 0, and then less than, well, there doesn't need to be a less than cap really, because you could be very old. And we're going to have a password area. Finally, since we're working with notes, let's say they have a collection of notes. Notes is going to be a list of strings. So each string is a note. And we've declared a base model for our user. Then we have to create a user database. So this will be useful for when we want to get all of them at once. Actually, no, we don't need to do that right now. So let's hold off on that. We've got a basic model here. So username, email, age, password, notes, and we're good. Now, we need to do the following. We're going to create methods that add to our database. So currently, we've just got this thing that will add in this random bit of functionality, but we need to implement methods that will create a user. It will update a user. So we give them information to update the user. That will remove a user and get all of the users at once. So the way we do this is we're going to start defining our functions. So we're going to do async. So when I say async or async here, it's to do asynchronously. And what that means is you're doing it in parallel, effectively. There's a more complicated explanation here, but it doesn't stop other processes because this is a web server and it can receive many requests and the like. Even if it requests, so someone sends a really big request that may block other ones, async prevents that by taking in other requests at the same time. So with that, let's say async def, and I'm going to retrieve my users. And this will return. So I'm going to do a list comprehension to just do it in one line, though you can just get each user. So I'm going to say user, and I'm going to say async because it's going to do it asynchronously. It's not going to block anything else here. For user in user collection, so I've yet to define my user collection. So I'll call it user collection is equal to database.get collection. So we're going to be retrieving the collection, and it's called user collection. Yep. And this will return all of users in our list. That's useful, but we're not modifying anything yet. So we're going to have to be adding a user now. Okay. In order to add a user, so I'm going to say async def add user, and I want to take in a data. So data as a dictionary, and we're going to be adding this as our model. So we're going to be taking a username, email, age, password, and notes. Okay. And I'll return a dictionary as well. So when I write arrow to dictionary, it's going to say the output is a dictionary. So we're going to say user is equal to user collection, which is a collection within a database. And we're going to insert one person. And it's going to be our data. We're going to have to await this because this could be taking a long time and we don't want it to be blocking other applications. Then from here, once it's been inserted in, it will, so if we go here, it will return this object ID. This object ID is like your ticket to accessing this person's data again. So you're going to have to hold on to it. So we're going to say new user is, we're going to fetch it again, just so that we're sure it's been inserted in. So user collection dot find one. And what I'm going to write here is I'm going to write ID, which is the ID I was talking about before. And it's going to be of the type, well, it's going to be a user.inserted ID. So inserted ID. So it'll take the object ID from this and it'll retrieve it from the database. And we're going to return the data. Return user. That's good, but I want to delete a user now. Yeah, let's delete a user, yes. So in order to delete a user, you'd have to get their ID first, obviously. So async def, and I'll call it delete user. And it's going to take in our ID, which I was talking about again, of a string type. And in this case, I'm not going to specify the return type so far. I'm going to say, okay, let's find the user ID. So we're going to collection and find one. And we're going to do the same process as before. So I'm just going to copy this code. Generally, it's a good practice to write your own code over and over. But in this case, it can be a bit hasty here. Now, we have to account for several things. You may have given an ID that's completely invalid, or you may have given an ID of a user that's been deleted or never existed. So what I'm going to do is I can tell you right now, this is going to return empty if the user doesn't exist. So this is an important thing to know. So if user, now, when I say this, it's to say, okay, is this thing empty or not? Now, if there was a found user, we can get away with deleting it then. So we're going to do await. I'm going to make this more zoomed in so it's hopefully more readable, like that. Yep. And then we're going to do await user collection dot delete one, and we're going to be deleting our ID. So it's going to be the same thing here because it's saying, okay, delete it on the ID. Okay, we've got deletion, creation, and all of the users. Now I want to retrieve just one person given their ID. So it's going to be similar to before. So we're going to say async def retrieve singular user. So we're not going to do multiple user, and we have to ask for their ID. And we're going to say user is equal to await user collection. So we're going to find it in the database. by their ID. And we're going to ask for their user inserted ID. If all is well, we can return this. But in the case that the user is not there, we don't want to return anything. So if user, return user. Now, right now, we're not accounting for what might happen if the user is empty. We'll probably talk about what's going on in the case that it may be empty. So let's try running this. Well, because why not? Just to see what could happen, basically. So we're going to do async. Oh, no. Actually, we might as well. Okay, so does anyone have any questions so far? Just like things to clarify or maybe areas for me to look back on? Okay, so right now, we've got all these asynchronous functions. So if I was to try doing an await and add user. Okay, so first off, I've got to clean up my database. This thing is here just because I tested it. So I'm going to delete this. Generally, okay, so here's another bit of stuff. What's going on is that with MongoDB, it's what you call a flexible schema. You don't have to conform to a very tight, very strict format like SQL, SQL/SQL, but you still probably want to keep a good, consistent record of what your database should look like. So coming back here, we're going to try adding a user just to show you what happens. So it's going to have the username tag. I'm going to test and email, blah. In this case, there's actually no validation. So there's no validation at this point. Now, you can't do this await thing here like this. So if I just run this, db.py. Now, it has to do an await here. So you can't really call this as is. You have to call it inside blocking thing. So it says here, you have to use it inside an asynchronous function. So I can't really test it as is, but once we do get to the point where you can test it, you will see that the database users get added to it. So finally, we've got to update our database. So we want a way to update our user. So they want to change something, we'll let them change it. So when I say update user, and I'm going to have to ask for their ID, which is a string, and I want to ask for the new data they want updated. Okay, so first off, if our data here is empty, data is empty, return nothing. So we can write this in shorthand as if not data, return false. Otherwise, we can start processing it. So first off, we're going to have to find our user. And we're going to say await user collection dot find one, and it's going to be the same thing as last time, this stuff here. And after this, we're going to say, well, we're going to have to update our user. So if our user is found, we're going to say our updated user here is we're going to have to call the update user collection dot update one. And the way I'm formatting this is pretty specific. So I'm going to be updating it on the ID. And it's going to be of the type object ID. And it's going to be our ID that we passed in. Then we're going to also specify, we're going to set, so this is the command set and we're going to set our data up. At this point, we don't really have a way of testing it. So we're going to have to debug it along the way if there's any issues or what might be the case down the line. So after this, after we update our user, let's check if it was true, because this will call a command to Mongodb. So if our user got updated successfully, turn true. Otherwise, it'll default to returning false. Okay, and here we've updated it successfully. We can't tell that we've updated it so far, but we've implemented the basic stuff to interact with our database. So any questions or like clarifications needed here along the way? We'll probably take a 5-minute break in case you guys need to catch up. If you guys are interested in like potentially something happening before we get back into this. So because this is quite a long session, we'll probably just pause for the time being. I think that length is still visible. Yeah, okay. Yes, so in the time being, I'll just talk about Heroku. So when you go to Heroku, this is what you call a platform as a service. So it will deploy your app for you and it will host it. If I was to log in, no, I don't have my phone on me. Okay, so I'm going to get my phone. I'll be right back. This is kind of a break anyway. So we'll resume properly at 5, but 1 second. Okay, I have my phone on me, so we can authenticate into our app. Okay, just running through what Heroku does is you give it a GitHub repository of some sort, and it will deploy it to the internet for you. So one of my deployments is Setule. So that's this site here. And the way it works is you specify the GitHub repository that it deploys to, and it will eventually run that up. It'll host it whenever people go to the site. So here, it's been activated because it turns off after some period of time. So this stuff I'll cover again, but I'm just doing it for the case of showing it. We'll get to the deployment stuff here. It can be a bit finicky, and I'm doing it mainly as a demonstration because it is very annoying to get configured. So hopefully nothing goes wrong. Okay, we'll start back again at 5. Okay, hopefully that was a bit of time to catch your air, catch some air, relax a bit, or maybe catch up with whatever you're doing. So now we're going to have to add in our endpoints, that is our URLs that we can request from. So right now, as you saw before, we had no specific URLs that we could request from. We're going to start by creating a new file called endpoints. app.py. Now, one thing I should mention is that the way Python works is a bit strange. So if I was to run a file from main and anything that it imports or uses, so for instance, this unicorn will look at this app here. However, when these imports, so these files here get imported, it will look from the perspective of the main directory. And in that case, what happens is if you were to import something from this file, the endpoints file, into the app file, it will get confused because it'll be looking from the main perspective and it'll say it doesn't exist. For this reason, you have to say from server. So server.endpoints. Server is the name of our folder here, and.endpoints, because you're doing it from the perspective of the main file location. Obviously, we haven't implemented anything in our endpoints file, but what we're going to be doing in our endpoints file is we're going to be adding our post, get, delete, and put methods. So if I come back down here, we have post, get, put, and delete. These are what you call function prototypes. I've just said they exist. I haven't specified how they should be implemented, which we'll be doing. But yeah, let's get into implementing these things. So the way you do it is you go to this endpoints file, and we're going to say from fast API imports API router. So this router will route into our folder file here, sorry. That and the body. And I'm going to do a JSONable encoder. So we're going to import this encoder, import JSONable deep encoder. So that would be useful for communication. And we're going to be importing stuff from our models file. So once again, we're going to be doing it from the perspective of the main file. So we're going to do import star, and then from server database. Okay, so I haven't actually, it doesn't matter in this case. So I'll leave this as from database, which is the folder, this file here. So we're going to put this database file into the server, but for the time being, we can leave there. So from database, import blank, import star. So in practice, star imports are bad, and you should only be importing the stuff you need. But I'll be doing it here because it's safe and it's easier than writing all the things you want to import. But I generally don't recommend doing it. And I'm going to say router is an API router. Now, what that is a bit unclear. So I'm going to just add in a dummy route. So I'm going to say router, which is referring to, like, you could think of it as a sub-instance of our application. And I'm going to say a get method, which retrieves resources. And I'm going to do /dummy. We'll pull it root, actually. And it's response description. So we're going to give it a description. This is a test. And we're going to call it async roots, get root, actually. And it won't take in any arguments. And we're just going to return hello. And let's give it a width. So we're going to have to be running from our main file here. Once again, py Everything looks to be good so far. Let's go to our API location. It's going to obviously error out on me. Oh, it hasn't been defined. Okay, so I've made a stupid mistake here in which I have not imported my endpoints. So let's do that actually, and I'll show off the reload functionality. So we're going to do from server endpoints imports. What was it? What were we importing again? So if I go back to the endpoints, I'm going to be importing our router, and I'm going to give it a specific name because if you have multiple routers, you may want to give them different names. So I'm going to call this router notes. But obviously, we haven't added in our router, so we're going to have to specify explicitly, please add our router in. So we're going to write app.include router, and it's going to be called notes. And you can give it tags if you want, notes. And this will be under the prefix. So the prefix is like already putting it to a subcategory. And I'm going to call this notes. So if I refresh this, go back to that page, we have notes root. So you can see the prefix notes is defined here, and you have the root on top of it. And it returns hello. There's a lot of information going on here, and I should actually take some time to explore what's going on here. First off, curl. This is a command line way of getting web things. So you can call it from, well, I don't know if this will work actually. You can try it. Well, let me try it here. Okay, that didn't work. It's probably to do with these slashes. But you can request it from this URL here as it gives you. Now, the URL here is from my local device. It's not going to be open to anyone else. But when you deploy this to the internet, it will give you the actual URL that you can request. Also give you server response, the headers it sent it with, and potential responses it can send you. That's cool, but we haven't got anything significant going on. So let's implement our database operations. So we've added a user, deleted a user, retrieved a user, updated a user, but we haven't got a way of telling the API to tell the database, please do this for us. So let's go back to our endpoints here. And we're going to start properly defining our methods. We're going to start jamming them out. So let's start with, say, adding the user data. Routed.gets. Now, here's the interesting thing that you should pay attention to. I'm going to keep doing slash for all of these, but I'm going to call different verbs on them. So a verb for the REST API could be get, put, post, or delete. That's what they are. They're verbs. Now, I won't give it the response description. It's just too much of a hassle at this point. So I'm going to say async def get all users. So first off, we're going to get a way to get all the users. And we're going to call in our database file, which has a function that has retrieving all the users. So users, well, we can do await retrieve users, like that. And we can return it. Return users. Now, what will happen if I do that, actually? So if I refresh this page, it will get all the users, but I have no clue what this will do at this point in time. So let's test it out. I haven't added anything to the database. I actually deleted everything from it. It's given us an internal response, internal error here. User async. Okay, so the async for method here that I implemented requires this it's a method here. So I'm just going to fix that up. So let's go back to our database here. And this bit here is a bit bugged. It doesn't like what I've done here, in which I've tried to call it a synchronous method. So what I can do instead is should be able to just, it's because I did this. I'm silly. Yep. When you do this, you should actually be calling .find, and this will get all of the users. When I did user collection, it refers to the whole collection, but not all of the users. So if I fix this, that should reload, and let's refresh. It returns empty because I haven't added anything to our database. So we should definitely add a new operation which adds users in. So let's go here to our endpoints file. And we're going to define a post method. So I'm going to say router.post. Post. And it's going to be from the same area. And I'm going to say async def add user. Now, add user is it corresponds to post. I'm going to have to take in data here. Yeah, I'll take in data. And okay, so this is where the Pydantic typing comes into effect, is that I can say I want it to be strictly of the form that I defined in my model file. So it should be a user with all these specifications. So if I do this, so if I specify my data has to be of the type user, and it will enforce that for me. So it will just be like, if you don't specify this data form, the app will not work. It will just refuse to send to the server. So we're going to say new user is going to be await add user, because that's what we called it. And what I'm going to do on top of it, should I do this? Okay, okay, so this is what the JSONable encoder does. We're going to be passing in a JSON, it basically encodes it so that it's JSON friendly. And we're going to do that on our data here because it's originally a dictionary-like object. The format may be a bit spongy or maybe a bit more JSON, but this will ensure it's in JSON afterwards. Then we're going to return new user. So after it adds it in, we're going to just give it back to the user because it will have the user ID, that object ID from before. Let's refresh and refresh our page here. We have this green method. Okay, so it's in this form here, which is very nice of them to give. I'm going to specify some settings here. So I'm going to say Bob test at yahoo.com, column 5, bad password. Hello, my name. We're going to give them those 3 notes, and let's see what happens. Okay, it gives the internal. Oh no, it's given an error here. So what's going on here is maximum recursion depth. Error. So where's this coming from? Add user, wait. Okay, so it's probably having an issue with verification here. So let's get rid of this JSONification. I don't think it's required really. So if I refresh this, that will restart the app. If I execute again, oh no. So it's still, okay. Let's, for the time being, get rid of this notes tab here. So let's comment this out. And let's get rid of this. I think this is causing a bit of an issue, potentially. So let's execute this. I know it's still, okay, something weird's going on here. So add user. Let's just check on the database to see if it's actually adding the stuff in. Okay, so nothing's being added in so far. What's going on here? Add user, data, wait, add user. Okay, let's go to our file here, add user, insert, that should be fine. Data of the user. If I remove this, I think it should be fine to work actually. So user name, come back here. And I'll just remove this specification for now because it's causing a bit of issue. Actually, no. So technically you should be writing it like this. So is equal to body, and I'm going to give it 3 ellipses. What this is basically a kind of default state thing. So if I was to execute this, it's still internal. Okay, let's just remove the typing altogether because this is causing a bit of an issue. Technically, you don't need the typing for fast API. It's perfectly fine. And query data value missing. Okay, there we go. We've got a new issue now. So unprocessable entity. Okay, so now we have a data issue from the server. And we have a value missing. Value missing. What's going on here? this be JSONable? Let's see, JSONable. So you may as well make use of this JSONable encoder from before. And we'll call data on it. Let's try running this again. And it's still a value error missing. Okay, so there's something going on here with our database, because if you look at what's going on here, this is a return from the add user here. So that's coming up here. You're required. Okay, so let's go back to our database file. Issue is coming from here. Let's debug it. So insert one, we insert the data. That's definitely fine. And then we get the user ID, user collection.insert one. Okay, let's first off, refresh this page, try it out. Oh no, okay, I see the issue now. That shouldn't be the way it is. That should actually be taking in our model here. But that should be our user, sorry. And if I refresh and try it out, execute. There we go. Okay, so we have a new issue now. Ensure this value is greater than 0. So when I did this before, I had to say it was greater than 0. Let me try putting in 5 in. And I'll put in random stuff here. There we go. If I try executing this, what is it? Okay. Strange. If I get rid of this, I think this should work. This is probably coming from this field here. So let's give it another try. Why is it like that? This is annoying. So what we'll just do here is that should be fine. Model. Okay. Let's go back to the drawing board here and just keep it to these 3, well, username, email, age, password. That should be fine. Yep. Get rid of age for now. And update that. Then at our database, okay, let's look at this again. Depth. What's going on here? Add user. I will add the user in. And then it should recursion. Okay, so come back here, execute this. So you should get rid of this now. Still returning a recursion error. I have not encountered this before. Like, I'm not sure why this is the case. So calling add user inside. Am I? Yes, thank you. That's a good point. Yes, I did not notice this. Yeah, okay. Basically, I've created a bit of an issue here. This is called add user, and I'm calling add user. Thank you, Josh. I did not notice this, but there's a clash in names. I should probably be giving these better names. So let's say post user. Yeah, thank you so much. So let's try this again. There you go. It's still internal error. Okay. So what's it doing now? Let's revert. Okay. Well, first off, let's revert to this. That should be more fine to work with. That should revert again. And that'll give us this example here. Blah. And give them 5. Actually, we'll just keep it as is. So execute that. Tell server error. What's going on now? insert one object is not iterable. Okay, that's a decent error this time. Where's it coming from, really? Fast API. Okay, so let's just try getting rid of this note one for now. JSON, add the JSONification of the data, add user, you add them, refresh the page, try this out. So here, okay, what's going on now? So post user, await add user. That will post it, get the user from here. User collection dot insert data, find one. Okay, so I think it's coming from here, probably. Find one, return new user. That should be new user. Not bad. And let's try this again. Still returning internal results. Okay, so what's going on here? Format user. Okay. So first off, I did this a bit hastily. So when I have to do user is equal to await user. Wait, no, that's not here. That's the user collection dot insert one. Okay, let's just check what's going on in here to see if it's actually adding it properly. Okay, this is very annoying to work with for some reason. So let's see. I'm going to do something out of the blue. So we're going to just, instead of trying to pull it like that, we're going to do this. So we'll try to add the user directly. So we're going to do add user. And we're going to specify directly what's going on. So ID is blank. We're going to try doing that for now. Okay, so new user is not defined. That doesn't need a return. Oops, there we go, fix that. And it returns null for now, but that should be successfully adding to our database here. Oh, no, it didn't add to our database. User collection. Oh, wait, hang on a second. Okay. I created a massive mistake here. What's going on here is there is something called user collection, and then we have something called users. I've been looking at user collection for some reason. So all of these things have been added in properly, as you can see here. So it's perfectly fine. I don't know why it was causing that issue before. So let's go back to here, user add. So we're going to do await add user, new user. And we're going to put in our data here, JSONable encoder data, return our new user. Let's try this again. And we'll pay attention to this database here and see what goes on this time. So refresh this page, copy this in, put in one. Okay, this is going to return an internal server error, but let's check what happened here. Okay, so yeah, it adds it to the database. So that means our error is coming from after we insert it. So it's down here somewhere, which is a bit weird. I don't know what it's doing to cause that issue. Particularly, it's a weird one. User.insert ID, user collection.find one, add user. Okay, strange. So let's leave it off at that for the time being. It is working for some reason. It's just not passing the data afterwards properly. Which is it's a bit annoying. Stuff like this happens. So, in fact, let's try. Okay, so, what I'm going to do. Let's see. I'm going to force it to debug it. Okay, so we're going to check env here. So we're going to deactivate our environment. And I'm going to put this into debug mode. So I'm going to Control-Shift-B. Oh, no, that's annoying. Going to go to our main file here. Control F5, Python, debug. Let's try debugging this. Okay. Why is it stopping here? Weird. That shouldn't be stopping there. There shouldn't be a breakpoint here. Whoops. Let's try debugging it again. And let's try running it in our thing. So let's execute this. It doesn't stop for some reason. Weird. Okay. During data is not dict. Okay, so it's coming from the JSONable encoder thing. This weird thing is causing us issues. Don't know why that is doing that. Object ID is not iterable. Object ID is not iterable. Let's try doing this instead. Execute this. Does that still do it? No. Document must be instance of dict. This is really annoying, to say the least. So let's try to put a breakpoint here, because I assume it's coming from this point. Execute it, and it's going to halt here. So let's step over this. Step over. Oh no. Oh, yeah, okay, so it worked. And let's look at user. So user is insert on results. And we're going to have an inserted ID here. And that's object ID. So we can convert this to a string, which is what I'm doing here. Or, well, you don't have to convert it to a string. There we go. That should be working. And let's see what happens when I try doing this outside the function. So let's step over this. And let's check new user. So new user is correct. It's returning the new user properly. And there's no issue at this point. Let's step out. Oh, it's perfectly fine this time. Well, it doesn't return it actually. So I've halted returning the new user. And that'll just step over. Everything seems fine. So sanity check. That seems fine. Step out. New user, once again, should be still valid. Yep, that's fine. And step out. Okay, so it's coming from here. Okay, so here's the issue. Our object ID thing here is causing us issues. So the format of this thing, if we look here, this object ID thing is a bit problematic because we're returning it directly and wherever it's coming from. So if we will look here, it's okay. To explain what's going on, it tries to return it as a dictionary, and that causes issues. So what we're going to have to do here is create a formatter class, so a formatter object. So we're going to create a new function, call it formatter, and it's going to take in a user, so that whole user object is going to return a ID, the string of the user ID, that weird thing that was causing us issues before. User name is the user name's password. Email, user email, and password. user password. Okay, so that'll format our data for us. And we're going to call this whenever we add our new user in, which is going to save us a hassle of this weird thing from happening, if my guesses are correct. Okay, so it's been reloaded, and hopefully everything should be fine after this. Okay, so it's doing the step through again, step through it. And let's check what the formatter looks like, just to see what's happening. So it puts it into a simple string, no issues here. And let's try it out. We fixed it. Now, the output here is this. So it's our thing that we put in, and after a lot of painstaking effort, it's finally working. So I polluted this thing with a lot of nonsense objects, but I guess we can keep them here. So if I was to load this again, we have 9 objects, and some of them don't have consistent formats. So that's something to be careful of. Okay, so big lesson for the future. Make sure you look at each of your data types before you get them back from the database. So let's just stop debugging for now. I don't want to be debugging continuously. Now that we wasted a lot of time doing that, let's try to add the other endpoints before we run out of time. We're going to have to implement a delete user now. So router.delete, and we're going to do it from the same endpoint. And we're going to do async def delete user. And we're going to take in the ID. And we're going to say, okay, user is equal to await user collection dot find one. And we're going to do that. Oh, wait, hang on. Yeah, that should be fine. User collection dot delete. And we're going to specify this. Actually, no, do we need to do this? We can just call this. So there's no need to do that. Whoops, keep forgetting. So these two things have the same method, which is why the star import is a bad idea. So I should call this del user, which is it's really bad practice, but for the time being, we'll just have to go with it. So we're going to do await delete user by ID. So I'm going to store that as deleted user because this will return the deletion, I believe. So if I return deleted user, let's give it a try. So let's give our new, better API a whirl. So come back here. Let's get all our notes or all our users. No, not again. Okay, this is the same error this time. At least we know what's going on. When you try to retrieve users, we're going to have to pull a formatter on it. And I'm going to have to put this formatter user thing on top of it. Like that. And we're going to try executing it again. And it's got all our users this time. Thank God. We also have our IDs. So let's say I want to delete one of these really bad entries. Where's the one with that string? Okay. So right now it's actually formatted so that all of the ones that comply with format, I think it just filters those ones. So let's get this string one and let's delete it. Let's put it to the test. Let's delete this boy. And this is local user is reference before collection. So let's go back here to delete user in our database file. And that should be okay. So that is not how it should be. It should be more like this. So we're going to have to actually say the ID explicitly. And to do this, you need to format it. The way we do this, it's like you have to do objects. So you're going to have to do object ID of the ID so that we turn into the object, the the type they want and do it here. And let's try that again. It returns nothing in this case, which is probably expected. I didn't remember what it did off the top of my head, but it's been deleted from our database. You can check it here if you check against the ID specifically. So if you try to search for this, it is no longer there. So it's been successfully deleted. We have a post, a delete, and a get method. But we want to also update user data in this case. So you can do that with put. We can do this with, okay, so here's a big issue that I didn't really foresee coming, is that these names are really coincidental with their endpoint names, and that is the reason why you may run into an issue here, which really should have thought it out better. So let's just try doing a router delete. Router puts. And now, in order to do this, I'm going to have to introduce a new model. So def put user, we're going to have to specify that ID, and we're going to specify the data they have to put in. We're going to create a new model called update user. So class update user, it's a base model. And it's going to have all these entries again. What we're going to do is we're going to say they're optional. So optional, wrapped around all of them. Now, in Python 3.10, you could do this, but this is assuming you may not be on Python 3.10. So this is why you use typing. It will just say, okay, you don't have to include it. It may be empty. Okay, and then that will refresh that. Oh, it's going to crash here, so probably shouldn't have done that immediately. This is going to be of the type update user. Oh, no, update user. And what we're going to do here is we're going to be calling our database update file. But before that, you may need to check if any of the arguments you passed in may be empty. So we're going to say, okay, so sometimes it could be like this. So username could be none, really. This is like if you're not going to update it, that is. And like email could be something new, really. You don't want to include the none. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to like write, say, filtered. And it's going to be field value for field value in data.items. Well, actually, it should be data.dict. So we have to convert it to a dictionary. Then you get its items. And I want to say if value is not none. Then after that, you say our updated user is await update user. And we're going to have ID filtered. I shouldn't be using ID, by the way, because ID is a keyword, I believe, in Python. So if I stop this and run Python ID1, it does, that is a built-in function. So you shouldn't be doing that either. It's not good practice, but we'll just roll for it. So if updated user, so if our response is not empty, return, actually, it doesn't really matter here. It may cause an error. We just want to see what it returns, really. Okay, so now let's rerun our application. Models. Oops, we got a comment here. Okay, let's see our new method here. it's got this cool orange glow to it. We're going to have to update. So this is the update user thing. So we have to take in our data. We're going to have to get an ID. So let's get this person's ID. Actually, no, we'll get this person's ID. That'll be better. Actually, no, we'll do it from here. So get someone's data like this. Get an interesting one. So let's get this. I think I said that before. Put that into here. And I want to specify to update their username now. So let's just say username is, sorry, let's do my name, I guess. And let's try to run that. Knowing me, it's going to fail on the first attempt. So there's going to be a value missing. So these things are missing right now because the way it formats it in is that you look at the endpoints file. It doesn't have these, I don't know, body and age. I don't know where body came from. That's weird. It's weird. Yeah. In theory, that should be working as is. I'm not sure why it's doing that right now. Let's just check the database again. Database. Update user. Set the data. Update one. Set data. Okay, it's an interesting, weird thing. Let's try specifying everything we have, actually. So I'm going to take in this. And I want to just write this down. So get rid of this. And I'm going to set the username to be side. Okay. I don't know why it's asking for the age. Weird thing. Field required. Okay, so it's very annoying to work with sometimes. Stuff just doesn't go right all the time. It may be something to do with what I've written here, and that it may not be complete string. But for the time being, we'll leave this as is. So I don't know why it's doing that right now. When I tested it, it did work. You can use the update method to change some attributes. But if it's not working, let's just leave it as is. I suppose we'll probably get to deployment now. If you want to deploy this into Heroku, let's stop the instance first and exit our environment. Then we're going to say git init to create a GitHub, Git repository here, not GitHub. Then I'm going to create a folder called .gitignore. So .gitignore, and that's going to ignore our environment variable, n folder, so it ignores the virtual environment, and PyCache. If I save this, that will ignore these two files here. Then afterwards, we can say git add this, so that'll add all the files that have been in the repository, and we'll commit it. First commits. So this is assuming you have Git. Git doesn't come installed on Windows, so you may have to install a Git client or Git for command line. In the case you haven't, just follow through this tutorial. So let's go to GitHub. And I'm going to create a new repository. And I'll call it Mac Xbuild API. And I'm not going to initialize any of the details because it actually creates more of a hassle, really. Create the repository. And we're going to add a new origin. So I'm going to copy this in. There we go. That will add the origin. We're going to branch into the main. And we're going to push it. Now, it will work for me. However, sometimes you will have to configure SSH keys so that GitHub's like, okay, we know it's you, that like you verified that this is your computer. In this case, it worked. Sometimes it won't. If I refresh this page, it's deployed, pushed it to GitHub. I'm not done yet. I can't deploy this right now because I have to specify how Heroku should handle it. So when I wrote this tutorial, there was this proc file thing. This basically tells Heroku how to deploy a file. It will tell it to run a web application, and it'll run gunicorn with 2 workers, and it'll run the specific process and the server app.app thing, and it'll preload. The preload thing just makes it faster. So we're going to create a proc file. Nope, didn't want to copy that. And proc file doesn't need to be a Python file. I don't know why it made it a Python file. Don't want to do that. So that's that. Okay, it's still formatting Python. And that should be it so far as what we have to add to deploy it. We've added the proc file, the git ignore file, the decouple file. Yes, that decouple file has been updated. So let's push this again. Git add R file. Then let's commit it. Added proc file. And we're going to push it. That will push it here, and we'll notice the change. So we see this here, that it will tell Heroku to deploy it like that. Now we go into Heroku here, we create a new app. Choose a region, we call it Mac Build API. And once it creates it, we can then go to, before we deploy it, we actually have to add our configure environment variables. So the same way I add this environment file, I have to add this in. So add Mongo as the key and this link as the value. I'll add that in so it's configured. And let's go to deploy here. And you have to give it access to your GitHub account. So you just have to say verify it. I have to search up by its name, Mac X build API, and connect it with that. And this will like connect it, but you have to deploy it. So let's try deploying this, and it'll take a few seconds. Probably like 30 seconds or so. It'll see all the dependencies, install them as needed, and it will tell us once it's done, and it'll be deployed to Heroku. I found that Heroku is very painful to set up in my experience, so you may experience a few times where it fails the first time. The way to deal with Heroku deployments failing is that you check the logs. So there's this option here to view logs once you've deployed it. Let's see if it works. So it says it's been deployed to Heroku. Give it a few seconds. There we go. Our app has been deployed. So before I actually look at the app, I'm going to check the logs. And it says build succeeded. It looks fine so far. Let's go back to deployment. And that should be overview. View build log. Let's go back here and check the URL out. And it's been deployed the first try. So initially, I have more issues with Heroku. Actually, let's before I get ahead of myself, I'm going to have to check if link to Mongodb works. That was not dummy. Why did I do that? Whoops! It's meant to be this one. Let's check if link to our database works. Okay, so we have an internal server error here. It's not working as intended. So we go back to our log here. And so what's it saying here? Pending app. It's not a very useful thing here. So I think what's going on here is that you may need to Mongodb. Don't know why it's doing that. App return formatter. Okay, let's try running this again. Execute. That'll return this other error here. Okay, let's have a look here. It does not say what it's doing. SGI exception. Retrieve as return formatter, self alive. Core. This might be to do with the fact that Mongo's the deployment. So if I go back to, the configure variables, this may not be set up properly, I think. Let's just check this here. So if I go back to the overview, it will tell me when it's been accessed. So if I click here, I don't know what the time it is displayed from. So it's 6:51. I don't know if it's like time zone relative to us, but generally, so far the API is working. It just doesn't like interacting with the server. I'm not too sure what the case is here, but in the case that it doesn't work, your best bet is generally to look at the API logs and try to figure out what's going on. So, right, runtime error task claim this attached to a different loop. All right, let's just try searching this. It's probably not going to return anything. Let's try this. Yeah, so it seems that okay, so there may be an issue with the way I've put this thing in here. I'm not too sure why it's doing that for the time being, but yeah. So far, I can't like demo much else because I don't know where the issue is coming from, but I guess I can deploy a version that is working. So I have like a version on the side here that is working, but that's pretty much how you get an API deployed to Heroku. You develop it in Fast API and then connect it to MongoDB, deploy it to Heroku, and hope it doesn't fail because there are a lot of reasons Heroku can fail on you for just no good reason at all. Yeah. So, any questions, queries, any thoughts? Probably wrap it up now-ish. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had to cover today. Unfortunately, there were quite a bit of issues just due to a lot of errors that we ran into. So I couldn't cover as much as I wanted to. The deployment just having issues is always an internal thing. I'm not too sure why this even occurs half the time, but yeah. Let's see. Could probably try doing this. No, there we go. Okay, yeah. Cool. That is all for today, everyone. So, in case you haven't already, please check out social media links, the Linktree. The notes are available. And they should be somewhat reliable here. I'll update them if there's any issues here. So put them into the chat. And if there's no more other questions, you guys are free to create your own APIs. Generally, they don't crash like this. And sometimes they're very nice to have, but a lot of the time they can cause issues. That's half the process. Programming is always half the debugging. So This is natural to happen because just weird things happen. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. Apologies once again, just due to the weird issues again, but yeah, this will be recorded, by the way, and it'll be posted onto YouTube. So yeah,